My dear friends, in our last few sessions or episodes, we were dealing with how to make the best use of our sense experience. And the intervention of today's session is the last in that series. We could call this session Sense Experience a Blessing or a Curse. All of us are endowed with a sense experience. It could be a blessing or a curse. Definitely what God has given us is a blessing. When we make the right use of it, it becomes a blessing. But when we misuse it, it can destroy us. It can darken our intellect. It can be a stumbling block in our spiritual pursuit. It can be a curse. We must thank God. I have said it before and I repeat again. We must thank God for this blessing. Because without sense experience, life on earth will be almost impossible, miserable. Because all the experience we have in the intellect has come through the senses. As Aristotle says, there is nothing in the intellect which has not passed through the senses. Our intellect is like a blank board on which nothing is written. The impressions come through the senses. Therefore, if we had no senses, we would not have knowledge. We must thank God for this. And we must make the best use of it, of our senses. That's our duty. In our hands, God has placed these precious pearls, our five senses. It's our responsibility to make the best use of them, to trim them, make them perfect, so that we can make the optimum use and gain what is best in them. On the other hand, or on the contrary, if we make the bad use of our senses, we must keep in mind what our Lord Jesus Christ said. If your one eye leads you to sin or becomes a cause of sin, it's better for you to pluck out that eye and throw. Rather than, it's better that you enter heaven with single eye than go to hell with two eyes. And he repeats as regards other senses as well. Meaning, when we make the bad use of our senses, it is worse than not having that sense. The senses put us in contact with the reality without us, but fail to evaluate it. Our senses, for example, sense of sight, puts us in contact with what we see. But the eye cannot evaluate it. Evaluation is done by the intellect, interior faculties. But for that evaluation, sense experience is needed. Senses must act in subordination to the intellect. If they take hold of the authority of evaluating what they have experienced, then we get into trouble. Senses, therefore, must act in subordination to the intellect, which means our sense experience must be subjected to the intellect. Intellect must dominate our sense experience. This implies interior discipline. I repeat, sense experience must be dominated, guided by our intellect, by our reason, by our will. On the contrary, if our sense experience dominate our intellect and the will, life would be totally disordered. We have dealt with this problem during the last few days. Meaning, how to bring about discipline in our senses so that they act in subordination to the intellect and will. That has been dealt with during our last few days. This implies bringing discipline in our sense experience, seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting. Bringing discipline in this implies a certain degree of privation, pain, and even darkness. Privation because, as the Lord said, eye is not satisfied with seeing, ear is not satisfied with hearing. When the intellect tells what you see and what you hear is wrong, we must have the generosity and discipline of life not to apply our senses. If we apply our senses to them, in spite of the intellect telling us that it is wrong, we destroy our life. Not to apply implies certain privation, because in seeing something which is not good, if our life is not good, we derive certain delight. We must deprive ourselves that delight. So it implies privation. Insofar as it implies privation, it implies pain. And insofar as it implies privation, it implies darkness. A person who wants to enjoy that sensation, when he deprives himself of that sensation, as regards that sensation, he is, as it were, in darkness. This discipline of our sense experience implies basically detachment. I have underlined it time and again during the last few sessions. It implies faith. Detachment means we don't set our heart on them. We make use of them insofar as necessary, but we don't set our heart on them. Once we set our heart on them, we become slavey, and we try to suck as much delight as possible, irrespective of the consideration whether it's good or bad. And we do this not because it is pleasing to our senses or our life, but because of the outlook of faith, in view of ultimately coming to the vision of God, enlightenment in God, in view of getting more enlightened even in our intellect. If we indulge in it, we indulge in disordered sense experience, we lose the state of grace. We lose virtue. We lose the state of grace. We lose our life and our salvation. For example, when a person indulges in drinking, he loses the virtue of sobriety. He becomes a drunkard and destroys his life. If we persevere in it, meaning in spite of this problem, because of the problem, we bring a certain discipline in it, we can make the better use of the senses. A person who has a disciplined sense of seeing or hearing now can see better, because his energies are not dispersed. His energies are attuned. Meaning, an example, when a student does not disperse his sense experience of seeing and reading a book, if he is not dissipated and distracted, he can read better, he can understand better, he can be enlightened better. And he can grow in the peace of mind and heart. Sound mind, better functioning our intellect. Meaning, when our senses are attuned well, our understanding is better. When our understanding is better, it can be subordinated to the Spirit. In addition, God gives a religious experience. What I am trying to say is, when a person, out of religious motivation, brings certain degree of discipline in a sensation, God gives him religious experience. He feels sense of devotion, commitment, fervor. with this religious experience, he can grow also in his religious life. He can have peace, joy, fervor, and consolation. So therefore, not only in our natural experience of the very sensation, natural experience in the intellect, but we can also have spiritual experience in the very sensation, spiritual experience in the intellect, and also religious experience in the sensation and the intellect, and we get open to the contemplative experience. With these gifts, we progress better and gain through sense experience. So what I am trying to say is, when our sense experience is disciplined and well-oriented, our very sense experience becomes richer. On the contrary, if we indulge in sense experience, we ruin our life and will not be able to come out of it easily. We ruin our life. I gave an example of a person who is a drunkard. If he indulges in drinking, he ruins his life and will not be easy for him to come out of it. This is the experience many people have in the society. Some may be as regard drunkenness, some may be indulging in lawlessness, some may be indulging in speaking, some may be in disordered sexual life. Such indulging may lead us to compulsive disorder, compulsive behavior. When we indulge in sense instinct without any control or discipline, it becomes a habit. When it is habit, it is difficult to control. It can become a compulsive habit. It can become a compulsive disorder. It can bring about a mental disorder. So therefore, while sense experience is a gift of God, we are custodians of it. We must make the optimum use of our sense experience. Otherwise, we ruin our life. When we bring our senses under discipline, the very sense experience can open us to better intellection. Meaning, when a student, a research scholar, discipline his senses, the very sense experience can lead him for a better understanding, better insight in his research, and even to the experience of God. If they are not brought under discipline, we run the risk of losing sight of God. When we do not bring the sense experience under control, we run the risk of losing sight of God, getting our intellect darkened, and we become slaves to our sense experience. A person without control of sense experience, a person without any control in sense experience, and this is often we see. Of course, we see among children, that's okay, they are children. But sometimes we see in an adult. And what is worse, sometimes people indulge in sense experience to that extent, they boast of their way of life. And they ruin their life and drag others into that. It's therefore necessary we attune our senses with certain discipline to the intellect and intellect to God. In this way, we grow in our knowledge on the one hand and grow in our union with God. On the contrary, when we indulge in sense experience without any control, such persons who do live such a life may be compared to monkeys bitten by scorpion. Monkeys are restless. They have to be restless. They are restless. If a scorpion bites them, what will happen? We see this situation in some persons. They are restless in their mind, restless in their body. They speak one thing, say another thing. They are so flexible in their talk, in the negative sense. They have no logical consistency. It looks At every moment, their software is changing. They cannot be relied upon. They are like monkeys bitten by scorpion. Another writer says, such a person may be compared to riding a wild horse, compared to a person who rides a wild horse without any reins in his hand. What would be his fate? Will he ever reach his destiny? Will he grow in his intellect? Will he be brought to the mystical experience? By way of conclusion, I would like to say, sense experience is a gift of God. It's a blessing, but we can convert it into a curse. It's our responsibility to thank God for the sense experience, grow in it, make the optimum use of it, and enable them to help the intellect to be enlightened, with enlightened in faith. Thus, when the senses and the intellect are enlightened in faith with the orderly life, our spirit also gets enlightened. We reach enlightenment. Thank you very much for listening to me.